This is your Chargers linebacker, Deion Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You could also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, the day is here. Everybody was questioning what the final cut down day was going to be when the Chargers finalized their 53-man roster. And actually, kind of with a sigh of relief, I would say a majority of Chargers fans are happy with the way that it turned out because final 53-man roster has now been finalized slightly. The initial 53-man roster has been finalized. Definitely would expect some other transactions to be made this week before we get to the week one of the regular season. But Dan, a lot to break down. I know you and I had discussed this over the weekend as it relates, pardon me, to our initial 53-man projections. I'm getting choked up already just talking about it. And we went 52 for 53. Not too bad. Not too bad. But you need to take over now because I still have something apparently caught in my throat. So you need to take over the rest of the introduction while I try to clear this.
Okay, you got it. Welcome to Chargers Unleashed Live. If you are new to this, all you got to do, have some fun. Give us some comments, some thoughts, questions. We'll do as much as we can ourselves. Do as much as we can to get your topics in the conversation, try to thread it through. If you have not done so already, please hit that like and subscribe button, and you can follow us wherever you find your podcasts. Jake said it before, 53-man roster. Jake's got tears flowing down his eyes as he clears his throat.
We're good. We're good.
Chargers make the initial statement with their initial 53-man roster. Jake said it for the most part. I think it goes chalk with what you and I thought. There was a couple surprises, but I think largely, I don't want to speak for you, but I believe they did pretty darn good job. And we heard all throughout camp and preseason, the coaching staff talk about the best players are the ones who play the best, and the ones who play the best are going to make a team. For the most part, I really can't find many examples of that not being true. That said, there were a couple surprises. But Jake, I guess kicking it off, I know the guy you wanted most, or I shouldn't say the guy you wanted most, but your darling, Tremon Morris-Thrash, was waived today and did not make the initial 53, which was a surprise. That was the one player that you and I both had on. Jarrett Patterson, running back 4, is now initially on the 53-man roster. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, that was the only difference in our initial 53-man projection, Dan, is because I had them keeping 3 running backs instead of 4, which they obviously ended up keeping Jarrett Patterson. And I had Tremon Morris-Thrash making this team. I kind of went with the philosophy, and just in terms of, you listen to Jesse Minter during training camp practices, you saw how he turned out in preseason game number 1. You saw how he turned out in preseason game number 3 with a great pick 6 that he ended up making. I really thought that he played his way onto this team. And when I saw the final 53-man roster come down with this, and obviously he was one of the sacrifices in terms of just getting waived by the team, I saw this as, when you look at differences in terms of, especially with the edge position, when you look at years past, when we've had guys that have come up in the edge spot and we've really been rooting for them to make the roster and ultimately they don't end up doing that, you know, obviously it was moved for different reasons around the roster, but this is the time, Dan, when I really gave it some thought just to think what would be the logic behind this. And when you really think about it, the Chargers' big 4 at the edge position has never been this strong before.
Ever.
And I understand it as a whole. It's always kind of a risk, especially when we've dealt with injuries like Joey Bosa has had in the past, and especially with a situational pass rusher that specialty is getting after the quarterback like Tremon Morris-Thrash does. I understand it, in the big picture of things as far as what they felt was needed for the team. This was competitors welcome. And there was a lot of people that competed for final roster spots. And it was going to be some hard cut down days if it would have went one way or the other for a certain players that ended up making this roster. But as it relates to Tremon Morris-Thrash, obviously, I hope that he ends up being put on the practice squad. I would also believe that he's going to have some interest, I think, from some other teams if they were paying attention throughout the preseason. So fingers crossed that he ultimately makes it there. I hope eventually at some point during the season, he ends up getting elevated and they end up keeping him there, because I definitely think that his pass rush presence, his translation from power to speed is just one of those rare commodities for a guy that's his size, and definitely a value to this team.
100%. 100%. Look, we do not run from opposing fans. Rusty says Mahomes owns the Chargers. I'm assuming it's the Chiefs fan. Look, Jay, we talked about it. The Chiefs are now 17-3 in the last 20 meetings against the Chargers. Say what you will, the Chiefs have owned the Chargers. And in that case, Mahomes owns the Chargers. New era, Chargers football. There every day. The Chargers will be there every day. And this is a new football team. But over the past 20 games, can't argue with you. A lot of people are, I don't want to say upset, but surprised about the Tremont Morris Brash. And I think optimistically hoping Robert Estes will probably bring Brash onto the practice squad. I can't see them letting him escape. I definitely think he is going to be back in the practice squad if he's able to. I would be surprised if he doesn't get picked up somewhere else. But we've seen many a times players that we've all been, clamoring for, i.e. Michael Bandy, shocked that the team didn't bring him back, shocked that nobody picked him up on the practice squad, shocked that he ends up back on the Chargers practice squad. So we'll see. But again, this is the initial 53. Some guys on here were surprises. Some guys were taken off as a bit of surprise. We're going to talk about all of that. But first, Jake, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet for up to $250 on your first deposit to bet from anything from the UFC to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. That's betonline.ag. Just make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
So, Tremont Morris Brash was cut off the initial 53. That means there's someone else that was on it. And the man of the hour who arguably put in the best preseason performance from a defensive player that I have ever seen. Tony Jefferson makes the 53, and I don't think anybody was surprised after that performance. But the bit of a surprise, the one that did make it instead of Tremont Morris Brash in our predictions, was the guy that we probably should have figured was going to be in there because he had that much of a promising and impactful preseason and training camp, was Jarrett Patterson. You and I heard from many of folks. We had Chris Room on the show just a few weeks ago, talked about him being the guy. We had only 3 running backs making the 53. The Chargers had different ideas and different plans. They brought 4. Chargers go with 4 running backs: Kamani Vidal, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Jarrett Patterson. Jake, which one of these two, I guess the question I have for you, which of these two do you think will have the biggest impact on a week-to-week basis?
I'd have to side with a little bit of Tony Jefferson, just because it's another veteran presence that you have back there in the secondary. Obviously, I know from Jarrett Patterson, when you and I were talking offline about it, and in terms of what ultimately was the decision maker to keep him on the final 53 as opposed to anybody else, his contributions on special teams, because that's been evident since training camp opened. He's been out there doing kickoff returns. He's obviously contributed just as far as the return team in general. So we know how valuable it is when you can be versatile enough to contribute on special teams. Ryan Fitkin obviously covets that. And it kind of gives you an indication as far as what the Chargers are going to end up doing. We talked about it ad nauseum, Dan, as it relates to Greg Roman's message. Not only are they going to run the ball, but they're going to give you a different flavor every time that they do it. And Jarrett Patterson, along with Kamani Vidal, they looked great in the times where they were touting the rock during the preseason. So if we're keeping on with this message about guys that are playing their way onto the team, even though Tremont Morris Brash was one of those, Tony Jefferson and Jarrett Patterson were also another 2 that did those same exact things. So you got to hand it to them. Competitors welcome was definitely the message that was sent throughout this entire team during the entirety of training camp and the preseason. and guys showed up. I'm sure it was definitely not an easy cut down day for Joe Hortiz to be making some of those decisions.
No. Again, if you have any questions or topics or thoughts, put them in the chat. We'll do our best to put them up here. Forgotten Locale says, JT Woods making the 53 justified or no? Jake, it feels like JT Woods kind of had a second lease on life.
Yes, he did.
At least on this roster. Once the coaching staff decided to test him at outside corner. And he seems to have taken it. Some of this, I think, is projection on what they could do with his skill set. But some of this has been a steady improvement of JT Woods this offseason in the things that he hasn't been good at, as well as the possibilities of him as an outside corner. We talked about the length, talked about the speed, the athleticism, the ball hawking skills. It was always the tackling and angles. Those were always the issues with him. Those are less needed on the outside, if we're being honest. And he has a lot more potential, I think, as a corner than safety, especially in this current Chargers roster. JT Woods, justified or no to you?
You kind of started getting those indications when we heard and we saw that JT Woods was not only being tested out at safety, but being tested out at corner as well. And I believe it was in the second preseason game, Dan, that a majority of his snaps, I think with the exception of 3 that he played in that game, were all at corner. And that's when the questions started really coming up. And if you just look at JT Woods' natural ability in terms of his athleticism, it's made for corner. It really is. He has the height for it. He has the athleticism for it. And especially if you listen to what Coach Clinkscale has been preaching since he arrived with this team, going all the way back to minicamp, he wanted his defensive backs to be as versatile as possible, to be learning to play both inside and outside. And in JT Woods' case, if it means having to play a different position, so be it. So once you started seeing those things happen with JT Woods, I think they kind of tipped their cap a little bit as far as what they were going to end up doing with JT Woods. And ultimately good for him. During those snaps that he ended up playing corner, actually did pretty well. So shows you what this coaching staff is looking at. And in going back to Jesse Minter's message, putting players in the best position to where they can get the most out of them, where they can succeed. I think you've done that.
Yeah, a couple topics, a couple people talking about one, Frank Gore Jr. Cameron Burnett says, what's more likely, guys? We get Morris Brash back or we get Frank Gore Jr.? And then Trevor McHugh, friend of the show. If you have not done so already, go follow Trevor McHugh on Twitter. If you have any questions about Michigan football, the guy is an absolute gold mine. But he says Frank Gore Jr. incoming. Jake, what's more likely? TMB back or Frank Gore Jr. incoming?
Look, if I wouldn't put it past Joe Hortiz and this team, the way that they've been recycling the roster for the past several weeks during training camp of what they've been doing, I think there's bigger free agent priorities that they would need. So I'd probably give it to Tremont Morris Brash coming back to the practice squad.
Let's see. There's a question in here around Stone Smart. Let me see if I can get that. Frank says, why Stone Smart? We should have gotten Brock Bowers. Okay, there's
well, look, as an avid Brock Bowers fan myself, I hear you on that. And I would love to see Brock Bowers in the powder blue. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's as good of a comparison in terms of the difference as far as who's on the roster. But you go back when Dan and I were originally talking about this 53-man projection, we had Donald Parham not making this team. Mm-hmm. And if you really think about what the message has been from Jim Harbaugh and what they need from the tight end spot, it's an indication there that Donald Parham is not where the team wanted him to be in terms of what he was bringing to the table for his blocking. Stone Smart, even going back to last year and probably the year before that, was considered the better blocking tight end, however your barometer is. But The message has been sent since free agency with them going out and getting a tight end like Will Dissly. You bring in Hayden Hurst, you kind of be that hybrid blocking, pass-catching threat for Justin Herbert. And with Stone Smart, he can kind of be a poor man's Hayden Hurst, essentially, because he's got both blocking and receiving capabilities as well. So, again, you got to look at the message as far as what the team ultimately wants from their tight ends. And we're not in the days of the pass-catching tight ends being tight end one really anymore. So it's just not the way that this offense is run. So it's a little bit of a change.
It's a different style of football for sure. And I think this Chargers team, especially the tight end group, we've talked about this Chargers team needing to go and becoming more of that bully ball, right? We've talked about this Chargers team. Oh, Jake is gone. I think he might be coming back soon. We'll see. I'm going to keep talking. A lot of people talked about Donald Parham Jr. from the perspective of, oh, but he's such a big red zone threat. I don't know. That was kind of tired. Jake's back. In my opinion, I think if somebody asked me, like, oh, well, what are you going to do in the red zone? I'm like, we're going to pound the rock in the red zone with 3 or 4 running backs plus Justin Herbert. And then if you really want to throw it, you got Stone Smart, you got DJ Chark, you got Josh Palmer. And if you want to go high, QJ. All 7 of those are options. Donald Parham was an option, but realistically, how many red zone touchdowns has Donald Parham had in his career? So for us to bank him being on the team because of him as a red zone threat, he hasn't brought that many touchdowns. I know he's had some. Remember the one he had, that laser touchdown last year, I believe, in the red zone that Justin torched in there. But this team runs, this team blocks, this team is physical. All 3 of those things, Donald Parham Jr. is not. And it's just the unfortunate truth. So again, I'm not surprised, but it still sucks. So I like him as a player, and I hope he gets a shot. I hope they can bring him back on the practice squad, but I just don't know if he fits what this team is really looking to do. But what is interesting, Jake? Eddie asked, did Nick Niemann get put on short-term IR? Yes, he did. That was one of the reasons why a Tony Jefferson is able to be on this team, or maybe why Jarrett Patterson was able to make this squad, or maybe why the Chargers were able to keep 7 wide receivers. Sky Gray, 7 wide receivers for now. Will that still be true going into week 1? Jake, they kept both Simi Fehoko and Brendan Rice. He being Jim Harbaugh was asked, is it possible they bring in 7 receivers? He said, it's possible. And everybody kind of was like, no way. They did it. And a lot of the questions about Fehoko versus Rice, and you and I said, we hope it's both, because it's not really all on Brendan Rice that he didn't get his opportunities during the preseason.
I say yes, Dan. And I really think that you kind of look at this as maybe a 4-week competition now between Fehoko and Rice until that point comes when Nick Niemann returns, because ultimately you're going to have to make a decision there. Do you end up moving on from Jarrett Patterson, depending on what his usage is at that point in time? Or do you sacrifice elsewhere? I think it's either a running back or wide receiver. So if we're just talking about 7 wide receivers, I don't think that sticks for the entirety of the season. And 7 receivers just in general it's not unheard of, but it's extremely rare. The Chiefs did it very recently in previous years.
Baltimore did it, I think, a few years ago, like 2021, I think they did it.
Yeah, but for the Chargers, I mean, the last time that they held this many receivers, it was, I think, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was 2020, maybe 2021, when they kept 6, but keeping 7 receivers for this team, I think it's kind of ironic, Dan, for a regime that has basically told us and showed their cards to say, we believe in the trenches, we're investing in the trenches, and you move on from Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, you recycle almost your entire receiving group. Everybody's wondering what the hell's going on. You have 4 wide receivers. By the time that the draft is done, you have 12. And all of a sudden people are saying that you have too much. And then you end up keeping 7 receivers on your roster. Look, I'll say this. Just like we were saying on our live show this past weekend, Simi Fehoko, you can't deny what he did during the preseason game. He's played his ass onto this roster and how he contributes to special teams. Now, Brendan Rice may have not done it in the preseason, but what Dan and I personally witnessed during training camp and the connection that he had during the days where Easton Stick was on during practice, and especially with Justin Herbert, he was getting great praise during practice. And much like Fehoko, he blocks, he contributes on special teams. And I'm glad that the coaching staff looked at it that way, because especially when you look at the opportunities that were given between Fehoko and to Rice in terms of quarterback play, it was not a fair shake at all. So I'm glad that the coaching staff saw that. I'm glad that they're giving him an opportunity because just from the work done during training camp, I think Brendan Rice earned a shot on this roster.
Brendan Rice definitely has some synergy with Justin Herbert for sure. And we talk about blocking. Go look at the Darius Davis touchdown run and see who's blocking on the outside. You'll see Brendan Rice and his guy out of the screen. Speaking of the quarterback, though, Jake, you mentioned Easton Stick. Eddie asks, are you surprised, Dan and Jake, that Easton Stick made the 53? Jake, they have 2 quarterbacks on the roster. Luis Perez was, I believe, I don't know if it was cut or waived. Easton Stick, Justin Herbert. Those are the 2 quarterbacks you and I both had on the initial 53. Not at all surprised. Jake, do you see that remaining?
2 quarterbacks, yes. Which 2? Aside from Justin Herbert.
I was going to say, Justin Herbert getting cut?
No, I believe that there will be a change at quarterback 2 before this week is out. Very surprising when you kind of look around the league in terms of who we thought was going to get cut, or, you know, keeping your eye open for certain names that were going to become available. The Browns ended up keeping all of their 4 quarterbacks that they had. So Jameis Winston's still there. Tyler Huntley is still there. DTR is still there, which if you look at it, probably the one that there's Desmond Ridder that's out there. A lot of people have been linking, and especially Daniel Popper in today's article, thinking that if Tyler Huntley becomes available, whether it's trade or they end up moving off of him, that he's the target that the Chargers would want. Why? Because the connection to the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah. And why stop the Baltimore Ravens wave to the Chargers now when you've been doing it all offseason? What's one more at this point? So one way or another, regardless of who the quarterback is, I think the Chargers have a good idea of what's going to be available here over the next few days. And I think that transaction will take place before the week's out.
Matthew says, do we keep Easton Stick because Herbert likes him, or do we move on? I think we keep him as quarterback 3 on the practice squad. And that's wishful thinking, maybe. We'll see. I think that's how it should be. But if it's just because of the camaraderie he has with Justin, I don't think that's enough. Because I don't think he's enough as a quarterback. Let's see. Nick says, I think Herbert barely passing the ball with this staff is greatly exaggerated. Jake, I would agree. What say you?
You're just talking about, like, in terms of just getting reps, getting time, him losing his rhythm. Is that what we're talking about here?
I think Nick is referring to, it's Greg Roman. They're going to run a bunch and waste Justin Herbert's talents.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go back to when we had Sean Merriman on the show. I think he said it best. It's like, does anybody really believe that Jim Harbaugh would have come to the Chargers if he was planning on wasting Justin Herbert for as much as he talked about Justin Herbert before he even came to the Chargers? No, not.
You heard him talk about him in the elevator?
If anything, this is going to strengthen the use of Justin Herbert. It's been a while since there has been a dependable running game. Just in this offense in general, Justin Herbert has barely had one during his time with this team. We know what he hasn't had defensively. So give Justin Herbert the opportunity to not face a pass rush every damn time, or allow his wide receivers to get separation. Have an opposing defense to actually put 8 in the box because they actually have to focus on the run game, rather than knowing that they can't do anything against the run and an offense becomes predictable and a defense can easily sniff it out. Yes. So those whole ideas, I believe, are exaggerated as well. I think Justin Herbert's going to thrive in this offense.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a question from Matthew Hernandez. Do we have 4 people on IR? I think there's 5, I believe. Chris Collins, Tyler McClellan, Chris Rumpf, Bucky Williams, and Nick Niemann. I believe Nick Niemann is the one that will be able to return after 4 games. Chris Rumpf, unfortunately, is out for the season. Tyler McClellan, who had a really good training camp and preseason, went down with a pretty bad injury, I believe, this last game. And then Bucky Williams and Chris Collins were the others. The Nick Niemann to IR for 4 games, that kind of opened the door. That, along with Chris Rumpf no longer being on the team because of the injury for the year, kind of gave the Chargers a little bit of a window here So they have a month's worth of real NFL action to see what the roster looks like without Nick Niemann. I'll be interested to see when he comes back who he takes the place of, because you've got 7 receivers, you've got a ton of DBs now, you can't really take away a linebacker at this point, you can't take away an edge. You could take a running back, maybe, but we'll see. But Nick Niemann is 1,000% going to be back in the 53 when he's healthy. Surprised? What do you think about the Chris Rumph news? Obviously, unfortunate. Were you surprised it was season ending?
I don't want to necessarily say I was surprised by that. I didn't think it was that serious. It's hard to gauge when Jim Harbaugh addresses injuries the way that Jim Harbaugh does, because we didn't even know if Nick Niemann was going to be a candidate for IR. We put that as a soft projection. If he was healthy, this roster would look dramatically different because Nick Niemann would be the one, obviously, that would be on it. And we'd be talking about guys like Patterson or Rice or Jefferson or anybody else that didn't end up making it because of that. So that's why in 4 weeks, it's still going to be a difficult decision. But as it relates to Rumph, I still believe, Dan, based off of, let's just call if he was 100% healthy, and based off of what we saw through training camp and obviously preseason, game-wise, you can't really gauge it because he didn't get a chance to play all 3. But I was feeling like that Tremont Morris-Brash was taking that edge 5 spot. If they ultimately ended up keeping 5, I believe that that's the route that they were going to go, regardless of whether or not Chris Rumph was healthy.
Do you think that, because you saw today, I think Chris Rim put out a video of Joey Bosa out there doing individual drills, and he had a pretty substantial hand brace thing on it. Then you see them only keeping 4 at the edge group. Do you think there's something to that? Do you think the Joey Bosa thing is not serious? Or do you think that, is there a connection between only keeping 4 and Joey Bosa / Tremont Morris-Brash?
Sure, it's a couple of things. One, I think they're confident that there's his ramp up between now and next Sunday will be just fine. Again, it's once again hard to gauge as it relates to injuries on this team now. But on top of that, like I went back and I said, as far as the reasons that Tremont Morris-Brash isn't on this team, I think they're confident in their big 4 as far as their edge group goes. Remember, when Bud Dupree was brought on this team, I can't remember a time where the Chargers were 4 deep at the edge with this type of talent that they have. So It's a good problem to have, and it allows you to be flexible at other positions. But yeah, to your point, Dan, on top of that, I think it shows good confidence that Joey Bosa is on track to be where he needs to be.
Yeah. Raging Bolt says, I'm a little surprised that Cornelius Johnson didn't make the 53-man roster, but Brendan Rice did. I don't hate it. I'm just a little surprised by it. I'm not surprised that Rice made it over Cornelius Johnson, because I think so far throughout camp and preseason games, Rice has been better than Cornelius Johnson, at least in my opinion. But as a receiver, maybe not as a blocker as much, but I think he has a lot more upside than Cornelius Johnson does, in my opinion. Are you surprised that Cornelius didn't make it? I feel like the writing was kind of on the wall because that'd be receiver 8.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised that this didn't end up taking place. Now, I get it from what Cornelius Johnson did at Michigan. Great contributor on special teams. Was a terrific blocker for them when it came to the run game. But in terms of the intangibles, and if you look at things fairly, the passes that were thrown to Cornelius Johnson, even in limited fashion, were better than the passes that were thrown to Brendan Rice. So let's just call a fair shake what it is. No, I believe that if you take the entirety of training camp and the preseason as a whole, I believe Brendan Rice still, even if you look at the lack of targets and passes caught during preseason games, I still believe that Brendan Rice had a much better preseason than Cornelius Johnson did.
Yeah, and I do think Cornelius Johnson is prime real estate for practice squad for this Chargers team. I think he'd be perfect. This Chargers staff would love that. Let's see. Sam DeSmith says, even though I'm pumped for Alt's rookie season, I did end up drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors for my fantasy team. Going to be interesting observing all situations. First off, great selections. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, I think, are both going to have ridiculously awesome rookie seasons.
Who are you drafting with?
I will say, though, it's hard to compare receivers rookie season to an offensive lineman's rookie season, because how many highlights are you going to see of Joe Alt or of any offensive lineman in the NFL versus the Sports Center top 10 plays that you see from the receiver? That's just not the way they were going. And this is coming from a guy who was obsessed with Malik Neighbors and was so wanting him to be on this Chargers team. But as soon as they went Joe Alt, that's when I was like, all right, you know what? You're right. It's Jim Harbaugh's way. And the way he wants it is smash mouth football. He wants to run it. He wants guys who can do everything. He wants versatility. He wants guys who can block. And that's not Malik Neighbors. Now, would he take Malik Neighbors? Obviously. But he would rather have the bona fide superstar offensive lineman to solidify both the left and the right side to protect the crown jewel of Justin Herbert. That's not, I don't think that's going to ever be proven right or wrong. I think it's going to be, do you take Penei Sewell or do you take Jamar Chase? Like, they're both epic. They're both great. Let's see. What did Matthew Hernandez says, did Spiller get a fair chance to show what he can do? He was awesome at A&M. Before this season, I would answer that no. I don't think he had a fair chance to show what he can do.
That's correct.
But I do think he had a fair shake during camp and preseason to put up numbers, and he just didn't. And it's unfortunate. He's still young. I think he's just 23 still, which is crazy.
Wild.
But he had his opportunities and he couldn't cash in. Go look at his yards per attempt during the preseason. It's like half, maybe, of what the other guys got. So it sucks. It's unfortunate, but he has a long career ahead of him if he can get things together because he's so young. He has traits. I hope that he can get a fresh shot somewhere else, and I wish him nothing but the best. But prior to this season, I don't know. I don't think he wasn't on the honor roll of the last coaching regime, tell you that much. And then, just couldn't make it. Let's see. Josh Jake says, under or over 24 hours until Easton Stick is gone. You said end of week. Are you giving?
I said end of week, so I'll say over. Again, I still think that there will be a period of time in the next 48 hours when you have teams that are not named the Chargers that are still going to adjust their rosters. Even though this is 53 now for every single team, you know that there's going to be adjustments here in the next couple of days, getting ready to ramp up for a full week of practice prior to week one. So, I think the Chargers can be patient with it as it stands right now and see who else possibly comes on the market before they may be forced to make a decision that may involve a trade, or maybe someone comes available that they may be able to swoop in on. They're no strangers to doing that thus far. It's during training camp. So, again, as I said on the live show, this is new territory for Chargers fans to be feeling like this way. And you got to tip your hat to Joe Hortiz, and you got to have the confidence in him to ultimately end up making the right decision. And I think if they're talking about churning the bottom of the roster and recycling every possible position, if it means getting the best 53 on it and strengthening this team at multiple different areas, I would say that backup quarterback is one that you can't ignore after those first 3 preseason games. So I have faith in Joe Hortiz that he'll be doing some wheeling and dealing or keeping his ear to the ground for whatever may become available here over the next few days.
Yeah, I didn't see this, but Tony says there were random rumor articles today of other teams like the Ravens and Panthers showing interest in Quentin Johnston. You think something can come out of it?
No. And this is why I say this. If this was still the Brandon Staley regime, possibly. I think you give Quentin Johnston a fair opportunity to reinvent himself. I think Jim Harbaugh knows what he wants to do with Quentin Johnston. We've heard wide receivers coach Sanjay Lal talk about what they've been working on. Dan, you and I were at the press conference there in person at the Bolt when Quentin Johnston was at the podium, when even Daniel Popper pushed back to say, can you give us some specifics as far as what you guys have been working on? And then he was able to go into that. Now, I understand that all of that needs to translate into moments in games. I get it. So I think they're going to give him every opportunity to do so. I do.
I do too. Young West says, I believe Quentin Johnson can seal wide receiver 3 throughout the season if he continues showing and building off of preseason. Totally. He's going to have all the opportunities in the world. But then Carlos says, chances Quentin Johnson is gone by the trade deadline. Let's give this a percentage. What would you say?
10%? 10%. Yeah.
The fact that we're even asking this right now, it just like he has not even had a snap in his second year yet.
Yeah, as a whole, not likely. I think 10% was being generous.
Yeah, I think it's less than that. No, I don't think it's happening. Let's see. Sam says, I've come around to alt as well. And to be fair, I got first in the draft order due to our league doing a beer mile to determine the draft order. And I ended up winning. Good for you, Sam. I would not win that if our group had to do a beer mile. Not a chance. But this is my chance to gloat. Okay, our group, every year we do auction drafts. This year, cornhole was a tournament. And let me just say, wipe the floor from the whole group. All the way to the finish line, I won. So if anybody wants to challenge me to cornhole, I'm your guy. Jake, let's see. A couple people have asked about guys that we think would be on the practice squad, as well as guys that would possibly be players that the Chargers and Joe Hortiz would be looking for. Which of those would you like to discuss first?
Wait, give me the two questions again.
Guys that were on the Chargers roster before that were waived that might be back as a practice squad, or external players that the Chargers might be targeting to bring in. Which would you like to discuss?
Yeah, I think the easy one. Let's go with just how the practice squad roster could be made out. I think this should be pretty simple in terms of guys that you would want to see return. I wouldn't mind seeing Isaiah Spiller if he ends up coming back on the practice squad. I honestly don't believe that he will, and here's why. I think just in one single season, when you've been clamoring for just to seeing anybody produce behind Austin Eckler, it just felt like it's been a chore. And then all of a sudden, Dan, in a single season, you're seeing so many running backs just come up and produce and produce and produce and produce. And all of a sudden, the Chargers have 4 deep with the ones we know that made the final 53. You had Isaiah Spiller. You still have Elijah Dotson, who was great last year, who I think that they could end up bringing him back because I think that the Chargers would love his type of explosiveness. I even still think that, is there a chance that Isaiah Spiller returns? Yes, because given what he did at Texas A&M, I think he fits what Jim Harbaugh and his style of running game would enjoy to have. Just didn't see it enough during training camp. Akeem Dent, who was another one of my undrafted free agent favorites. I really liked what he brings to the game. As Joe Hortiz loves to say, you can never have enough guys in the secondary to keep producing for you on that. Gerard Clark is another one, the interior defensive lineman. Outside of just production, they just do not make men the size of Gerard Clark. So you got to love that. Cycle this through with me here a little bit, Dan, just so I kind of have a full gamut so I don't miss anybody when we're talking about them. Thomas Harper obviously is one. Again, once again,
I can see him back for sure.
That you think about. Matt Hankins is another one. Obviously, Cornelius Johnson. We had discussed that as well. I think you keep a little bit more. Yep. I think you keep a little bit more linebacker depth, just given the situation that took place with Nick Neiman, just as kind of a fail safe there. Shane Lee is another one in terms of that linebacker depth.
Yeah. Alex Leatherwood.
No. No.
DJ Okoye is probably back.
Yeah.
I think Patrick. Willis
Patrick. Yep. Willis Patrick is another one. I really liked what he saw in limited snaps during the preseason, so I think that that's a good reserve that you have.
And Ty
Shelby, yes. So number of guys, but yeah, I mean, I think that you see the Chargers make a good faith effort to try to get a majority of these guys back on the practice squad.
Don't be surprised if Tucker Fisk makes it too. I think you're going to see a lot of tight ends on this practice squad, especially if they're going to go 3.
Yes.
So Yeah, I would probably say Tucker Fisk. But yeah, that's probably the rest. Maybe Zach Hines too. I think Chris Hinton probably comes back. I don't think Luis Perez comes back. Yeah. I know Zamari Walton had an impactful preseason. I know the team was high on him when especially on the last preseason game, but I don't know if they bring him back. But yeah, are you surprised? There's a couple people asking about a Boygby. We didn't get to hear his name that much until the last preseason game. Chargers fourth round selection, Justin Boygby. He's only got 4 pressures in the last preseason game. Are you at all surprised that a Boygby was retained?
No. And I say that just from the standpoint that if you go back and you look at Joe Hortiz's track record going all the way back to Baltimore, and Dan, I'd even said this to you before the draft, and when we were trying to determine where and when they might be addressing certain positions, for 10 out of 11 years, the Baltimore Ravens addressed the defensive line between rounds 1 and 4, every single one of those years. And of course, Boygby was taken in the 4th round. So as much as Jim Harbaugh obviously likes to address the trenches as on the offensive side of the ball, Joe Hortiz likes to do the same. And I think that in terms of limited snaps or whatever it is that you want to say, I like what I've seen from him in training camp. Tahir Tart obviously had something to do with that, and you got to be happy about that acquisition because the Chargers were very high on getting him during the beginning of free agency before the Dolphins ended up beating them out. But it was a gift that he ended up getting released, and what we've seen from Tart in his limited snaps that he's been with the team has been very positive. So, no, I never had any expectation that they were going to move off of a Boygby being a 4th-round pick and going into his first training camp as a rookie. No, I think that they're going to give him time to develop. As you mentioned, Dan, Tyler McHugh, he even said that Justin Boygby is a perfect fit for what Jesse Minter wants from his interior defensive lineman. So you just got to give it a little bit of time.
Yeah. Let's talk about some other names externally that the Chargers could possibly bring in. One name, and I said this to you earlier, Jake. I was high on him when he came out of college. But Caleb Farley has had a very tumultuous NFL career. I think he's had 2 ACL injuries. I think he had a back injury as well. He basically has played like close to, I think maybe 8 games in 3 years, I think. Potential through the roof. There's a reason why he was selected so high. The cornerback, Caleb Farley. I can see him being kind of a practice squad, take a project similar to like a Kristian Fulton type, Alex Leatherwood type, where just had a bad shake previously, but he has the traits. I can see this team with Jesse Minter, Steve Clinkscale, Ben Herbert, and company kind of taking a flyer on him. A couple other names you saw today. I was curious if you thought anybody would be interested. Kadarius Toney. Interested?
No.
Any receiver. Do you think this team needs a receiver right now? That was cut. There's names like Noah Brown was out there. Martavis Bryant, I think, was out there. Terrence Marshall was out there as well.
In previous years, I would probably say, no, they're going to roll with what they got. I'm not going to say, I'll say it's more, I'll say it's less likely, but still a possibility given the fact of Joe Hortiz and his philosophy on trying to build this roster up better. But you kept 7 receivers. I think that's kind of an indication that they're happy with the guys that they built up during training camp. Is it absolutely out of the question? No, I won't go as far as to say that based off of what we've seen. But I think that they're okay as far as the wide receivers goes and what their confidence level is. You can grade this wide receiver group to anybody else, and I totally get that in terms of, don't miss out on an opportunity to strengthen up a unit. I get that, and I'm not saying that Joe Hortiz wouldn't. But I'm saying them keeping 7 receivers at this point in time, I think that they're happy with how their guys showed out during training camp and preseason games.
A bunch of quarterback 2 options. You saw a lot of quarterbacks get cut. There's talking here about CJ Beathard, Bailey Zappi's there, Desmond Ritter's there. You talked about
I got
Snoop?
one myself. How about center Ricky Stromberg, who was a former third-round pick of the Washington Commanders? Again, if we're talking about building the depth of this unit, I would take Ricky Stromberg to replace Brendan Hymas as a backup center. Hell, this could potentially even be one of your solutions after Bradley Bozeman, depending on how he ends up performing. If he's just a one-year rental, you might end up having a guy who can be a replacement right there. So I would love for them to take a flare on Ricky Stromberg if they get an opportunity for that. Build up that offensive line a little bit more.
Would you do anything with the safety room? I know the former rookie safety, Lewis, is it Kine? Cine? I can't pronounce his last name. Cine from the Vikings.
Again, Dan, I think they're okay. Again, if you look at just training camp and preseason as a whole, there's not many positions groups outside of linebacker and corner that you could say performed better than those two groups. All of a sudden, the Chargers are super deep and super competitive at both of those positions. I think that they're fine. And again, if you came to a decision to ultimately find a way to keep Tony Jefferson and JT Woods on this roster to all of a sudden have 11 DBs, something that this team historically has not done. Normally they just keep 10, and it's a combination of either 5 and 5 or 6 and 4. But you had so many DBs in camp that ended up showing out, competing, earning a roster spot. If you were to tell me right now, would I take Lewis or Tony Jefferson? I'd say Tony Jefferson hands down.
Sure.
Why would I possibly give up a veteran presence like that, especially with the way that he played himself onto the roster in a third preseason game for a guy who's been in the league that long, who specifically, by the way, came out of retirement to just come into audition to play for the Chargers. And look at this, where we're at just a couple months later.
Yeah, again, Robert, I believe we're referring to 7 receivers for the Chargers. I don't remember the last time we saw 7 receivers for the Chargers on a 53-man roster. Yes, there are the teams that have done it. It's still not that common, but still. UTP says Bozeman is barely average. Hard disagree. I don't know where you're coming to that conclusion from, other than him playing in Carolina with a rookie quarterback who got smoked all season, not just because of the center, and took the most sacks I've ever seen. I'd take Bozeman with Greg Roman and company in the new offense. I think it's above average, in my opinion. Another name, familiar foe. Should we bring back Desmond King? Jalen Guyton was another name that was cut/waived today. T. Billy, another name that was cut/waived today. Let's see. Clapp. Will Clapp, also released today. Would you take him back?
Would I take Will Clapp over Brennan Hymas as far as a depth piece? Yeah, I'd consider that. I thought Will Clapp as a depth piece, as an emergency center, was decent enough. And especially last year, he got a lot of work in. So I would take that. I would throw out a flare for that for sure.
Jorge says, if Bozeman's better than Clapp, I think that's worth clapping for. Well done. Well done. Desmond King.
Same argument, Dan. You've gotten such good competition out of your DBs right now. And if Tarheeb still wasn't here, then maybe I would consider it. But no, I think that they're good at DBs right now.
Rat roll. Defense number 3 and 26. Excited. I don't know if he's referring to the Asante, Samuel, and Derwin, or is that something else? That's
where my mind went.
Derwin was back today. You saw
Yes.
that? Hallelujah. Well, Jake, any other, I guess, key points from the 53 announcement today?
No, we'll see. Obviously, again, this is the initial 53. Anything can happen here in the next 6 days or so, but you're going to see some decisions come down, whether it's one move or more for this Chargers team. I think that if Joe Hortiz sees any opportunities to strengthen this roster, I think he's going to do it. So totally anything could happen in regards to what Dan and I feel shouldn't happen or might not happen. This wide receiver room could look totally different in the next few days. Running back could look totally different.
What do we
Offensive
know?
line depth. Yeah, again, we don't know anything but again, we're not used to a GM doing this, and it's quite refreshing, honestly. So if there's opportunities and surprises that Joe Hortiz has up his sleeve, we'll soon find out. But as it relates to backup quarterback, I would put some good money on it.
Yeah. Jorge Rodriguez says, thoughts on the club on Bosa's hand? We talked about this briefly before, but does that concern you?
No, it doesn't. The time already that Bosa has been out and not practicing, as Jim Harbaugh would say, he's going through something. I think them only keeping 4 edge players and seeing Bosa out there today, I think is an indication that come week 1, he's going to be able to play.
I will say the fact that they put Justin in a boot for 2 weeks as an abundance of caution, I feel like they wouldn't put Joey Bosa out there in a glove or whatever that is if they didn't feel abundantly sure that he couldn't worsen it. So I think I'm with you. I think I agree. Let's see. Friend of the show, Athir says, my big concern is offensive line depth. Not good. I do not like it. Jake, what say you?
I'll say it's better than it's better than it has been previously. I think Foster Sorrell has made some good improvements. I think that he's proven that he could be a good swing tackle. He could play inside, outside. Obviously, we've seen what Jamari Sawyer can bring to the table in that circumstance. I think that the depth is better. I get it. You can't have 10 offensive linemen that are going to all be world eaters. Okay. So we understand why the starting 5 is the starting 5. But I think from the standpoint of Joe Hortiz, I think he's still going to look at opportunities to improve that. But again, if you look at this depth as opposed to depth that you had previously, I think it's better.
We got about 10, maybe 15 more minutes left here. If you guys want to give your last minute, we'll try to do some rapid fire here for responses to questions, comments, and topics. While we do so, again, do us a favor. Take 10 seconds while you're hearing my crappy voice talk. Hit that like and subscribe. Smash the like button if you can. Subscribing helps out a ton. We love doing these live shows. Honestly, it's so fun because we kind of give the reins to the listeners and the viewers, and you kind of help us steer the ship for an hour. We can't go an episode without poking a little bit of fun at the Raiders. Raiders fans have been nagging, says Jorge Rodriguez, about Telesco's lack of moves. LOL. Oh, I love it. Okay, here's the game. Jake, of any Charger that was released today, /cut, which one do you think is the most likely to become a Raider?
Donald Parham would probably be up there for one. All of a sudden, Tom Telesco is really investing in tight ends with getting Michael Mayer and Brock Powers. And, I could totally see him bringing Donald Parham in as a candidate to join that 53-man roster. Isaiah Spiller definitely could be an opportunity for him.
Since he drafted him high as well.
Yes.
Remember.
Yeah. Basically, look at just any of one of the free agents or anybody that Tom Telesco drafted. You might see them in a Raiders jersey by the time that this week is out.
Yeah, Nick Samarikov? Hortiz, I apologize if I butchered that. Hortiz said he will always be looking for talent all year long. Jake, we just give a hallelujah.
He's lived up to it. He's lived up to it thus far. And we're not even into week 1 of the season yet. And I would say that he is proving that point right now.
Alan C., Jake, leave this to you. I think if we can't get Huntley, I think I'd try to get Jameis Winston.
I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all.
Alan, Herbert can't deal with Winston. Winston would be a character. Can you imagine like Winston huddles with both Justin and Jim Harbaugh? Like the dichotomy of those 3 people would be epic.
Obviously, this is not a realistic option, but I just all of a sudden, I just had a moment where I pictured a quarterback room of Justin Herbert and Ryan Fitzpatrick. If you're talking like characters in terms of how you build up your quarterback room to say like, who's like the wackiest duo or trio that we could create? Ryan Fitzpatrick would be another one of those guys. But Jameis Winston, I would be 100% fine with. You get a veteran quarterback in this room and has proven that he could spin the ball better than what the Chargers have had at QB2 for some time now.
Rick says, who's got it better than us? Everyone. And the Chargers fans all said, let's see. Question from Lance. You guys going to the week 1 matchup versus the Raiders?
Oh, I like how you're putting this on me, Dan. I will know.
I'll be there.
I know Dan will be there. I will know for sure following tomorrow.
Woo.
Yes.
Ooh, maybe we'll see Chargers Unleashed Chargers game. That could be fun. Athir asks, what are you excited about week 1? Which side of the ball? Can't wait to see. I want to hear this, please. What are you excited about week 1? Which side of the ball are you more excited about?
As much as I cannot wait to see Justin Herbert out there in this offense with this running game and this young crop of fresh receivers, I am itching to see this defense play. The one thing that Justin Herbert has not had since he's been in the league is a defense that doesn't surrender 28 points every single week. And we've all seen the stats with what Justin Herbert's win-loss record looks like when his defense plays up to par.
I think I saw today it was like 16-0, wasn't it?
I cannot wait to see what Jesse Minter is going to deploy when we're talking about the full complement of starters out there in week 1.
Yeah, Jorge Rodriguez says, Jake's going to go ham at the tailgate. Don't call him Jake the Tank for no reason.
Appreciate it.
Jake can throw it back. Jake can throw it back.
I can. Sometimes I embarrass myself. No shame.
I don't know anything about that, Jake.
Nobody's ever called me the Tank before, so I appreciate that. I like to think that I'm built that way, but I am not.
I am not. I'm curious, folks in the chat, what are you most excited about week 1? And are you more excited about offense or defense? I'm torn. Sweet Jumps took it from me. To see Justin have a run game is almost as exciting and tantalizing as Justin having a defense. But I think it's the DBs. I think because that group has been such an Achilles heel for this Chargers team. And that group, at least so far, during preseason at least, has been a pretty darn consistent strength of this team. And that's without the starters for most of it. We also haven't gotten to see the 4-headed monster up front and what that edge group would look like. Could be fun. But yeah, that run game though, like maybe this is an easy cop out, but all 3 of those I'm looking forward to. And just to kind of put a layer on that with Jesse Minter and his defense, I think seeing the adjustment and like the maniacal method in which he deploys his blitz packages and wreaking havoc and causing chaos, you're seeing it a little bit in training camp. That's like vanilla stuff. I think that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, is just seeing guys all over the place, but seeing it work, because we saw it before and it didn't work. Jake, any here that I've missed? There's a bunch here now that I haven't gotten to. Let's see. Pablo says, good to meet you at San Diego Tailgate, Dan. How many sacks for Khalil and Bosa against the Raiders? How many sacks for Mac and Bosa? If I told you over under was 3.5, what would you take?
I'm not saying this to bring the mood down, but I would say under. That's what I would say. Why do I say that? Because I think Tooley's going to get an opportunity to get some as well. I think you're going to get some inside pressure as well. So that's the only reason why. I think the love is going to be spread as it relates to that defense getting pressure. If you've been watching preseason, if the early indications, while not giving away the entire playbook, have you seen the way that Jesse Minter has been blitzing? Yeah, I think that there's more than a fair share of players that are going to get theirs outside of just Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa.
And Jalen G. Alt versus Crosby. Forgot about that one.
That's going to be a big test for Joe Alt come week 1.
Yeah. And Christian Wilkins is going to be a big test for the interior as well. So there's tests all across the board for the offensive line. And again, what we've seen in the past, Max Crosby is like, hey, no thanks. I'm just going to go to Trey Pipkins or whoever on the right side because he's not doing much with Rashawn Slater. I mean, those are two bona fide superstars. You can't do that anymore. And I think Joe Alt's going to be just fine. Jorge says, I'm really curious to see how the pass game looks.
As do we all. As do we all.
Yeah. Jake, any other main topics you wanted to cover that we have not yet discussed before we roll out of here?
No, this is the 53-man roster. Obviously, it's not finalized, so any updates that are going to happen here over the next few days will obviously come on here and discuss it. But Dan, preseason's officially in the books, my friend. The initial 53-man roster is made. We're less than 2 weeks away from the first Chargers game of the 2024 NFL season. You know, we're really going to get into the week 1 preview next week, but now's just the time to just get hyped, get excited. It's almost here.
We're close. We're at week 0. Like it's crazy to me that 2 weeks from now we'll be discussing a Chargers. We'll hopefully be discussing a Chargers win.
You got it right there.
Week 1. But look, we now know who the initial 53 is. And again, as we said at the top, for the most part, I think we got 52 right. The 53 that we did not get was Jared Patterson over Trayvon Moore's Brash. But we're close to getting football started. And we'll be having more and more episodes as we get close. Probably have a special guest here or two in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. I think it's time to do a giveaway soon too, by the way, Jake.
That sounds good. To kick off the NFL regular season, I'm down for that. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Yes. Jake, anything else before we head out of here?
Negative, sir.
Let's go home. Chargers fans, you found your 53, at least your 53 to start. We'll see what happens in the next few days. Jake has predicted we'll probably see at least one name brought in. Will it be a quarterback or will it be somebody else? We'll find out. The team has been high on a lot of guys they brought in, and some of these guys have balled out during training camp. Tony Jefferson went God mode, got himself a 53-man roster spot, and got to feel good for him because he deserved it. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you have not done so already, please hit that subscribe button. It helps out a ton. Leave a review, leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts, feedback. But until then, we will discuss all of that and more as the Chargers season is about to begin. Chargers, Raiders, less than 2 weeks away. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Thank you guys and gals so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next on Chargers Unleashed.